Welcome to Mysterious Encounters. I'm your host Ryan. Tonight, we're diving into something particularly spine-chilling. Joining me is Sarah Mitchell, a paranormal investigator who's going to share some truly unforgettable experiences. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. I have to say, even after years of investigating paranormal phenomena, these three encounters still give me chills when I think about them.
I understand these experiences happened in very different settings. Could you start with what you call the alley incident?
Of course. It was about 2 years ago. I was walking home from a late-night investigation in downtown Portland. I'd taken this route dozens of times before, but something felt different that night.
Different how?
You know that feeling when the air suddenly gets heavy? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I sensed someone watching me, but the alley was completely empty. At least that's what my eyes were telling me.
But your instincts were saying something else?
Exactly. As I quickened my pace, I started hearing footsteps behind me. They matched my rhythm perfectly, but would continue for a split second after I stopped, like an echo that shouldn't exist.
That's incredibly unnerving. What did you do?
I'm trained to remain calm in these situations, but this was different. When I turned around, I saw what I can only describe as a shadow taking human form. It was darker than the surrounding darkness, if that makes any sense.
A shadow darker than darkness itself, that's terrifying. Did it move?
Yes, and that's when true fear set in. It began advancing towards me, not walking exactly, but gliding. The streetlight behind it seemed to bend around its form, creating this impossible void.
As a paranormal investigator, you must have encountered many unusual phenomena. What made this different?
Most paranormal encounters have a certain pattern, a predictability. This felt primal, like being stalked by something that shouldn't exist. I ran and I could feel it pursuing me, the temperature dropping with each step.
How did it end?
I reached the main street, and as suddenly as it began, it was over. But that experience changed how I view urban spaces at night. Sometimes the most frightening encounters happen in places we consider familiar.
That's fascinating, how our everyday surroundings can become threatening under the right circumstances. Speaking of environment changes, your second encounter took place somewhere completely different, didn't it?
Yes. About 6 months later, I was investigating reports of strange occurrences at a remote cabin in the Cascade Mountains. The owner had been trying to rent it out as a vacation property, but guests kept leaving early, all describing the same disturbing experiences.
What kind of experiences?
They reported hearing footsteps from the basement at night, even though the cabin's blueprint showed no basement existed. That detail alone was enough to pique my interest.
A non-existent basement? That's quite a mystery. How did you approach this investigation?
I decided to stay there alone for 3 nights. The first day was spent taking baseline readings, checking for natural explanations. You know, the usual protocol. But as night fell on that first evening, I discovered something that wasn't in any of the reports.
Something that wasn't in the reports? What did you find?
While checking the floor for structural anomalies, I noticed that tapping certain floorboards in the living room produced different sounds. After careful examination, I found a hidden trapdoor, perfectly concealed beneath an old rug.
So there was a basement after all?
Yes, but that's not the strangest part. The owner had bought the property 10 years ago, and the previous owners all claimed there was no basement. It's as if it appeared over time.
Did you go down there?
I had to wait until morning. Professional as I am, there are some things you just don't do alone at night. When I finally descended those stairs, the temperature dropped at least 15 degrees.
What did you find down there?
The basement was completely empty, except for a single chair facing the corner. But here's the thing. Every time I went back down, that chair had moved, even though my equipment showed no one had entered the cabin.
That's incredibly unsettling. Did you experience anything else?
On the final night, I set up cameras in the basement. Around 3 a.m., I heard those footsteps everyone had reported. When I checked the footage later, I saw something that still haunts me. The chair slowly turning by itself, degree by degree, until it faced the stairs. As if something was sitting there, watching.
That image is going to stay with me for a while. Did you ever discover the history of the property?
Research revealed that in the 1940s, a previous structure had burned down on that site. The only survivor was reportedly found sitting in a chair in the woods, unable to speak about what happened.
These two encounters seem to share a theme of being watched by something unseen. But I understand your third experience, the one in the cemetery, was even more direct.
Yes, the cemetery encounter was different. It happened at the historic Riverview Cemetery just last month. I was documenting old headstones for historical research, and a fog rolled in unusually quickly.
Was this during the day?
Late afternoon, just as the sun was setting. The fog was so thick, I could barely see 10 feet ahead. That's when I heard what sounded like children laughing.
In a cemetery at sunset?
Exactly. My first thought was that some kids were playing pranks. But when I followed the sound, I came across a section of the cemetery I'd never noticed before. All children's graves from the 1918 influenza epidemic.
And the laughter?
It grew louder, but different now. Through the fog, I began seeing what looked like small figures playing between the headstones. But every time I moved closer, they'd fade away, only to reappear further back.
Were you scared?
Surprisingly, no. Unlike the alley shadow or the cabin presence, this felt peaceful, sad, but not threatening. Then something extraordinary happened.
What was it?
A small girl, perfectly clear despite the fog, walked up to me. She was wearing clothing from the early 1900s, and she seemed curious. She reached out her hand, and I felt a cold brush against my fingers before she disappeared.
That's incredible. How did this experience compare to the others?
It taught me that not all supernatural encounters are frightening. Sometimes they're reminders that there's so much we don't understand about life, death, and what might exist in between.
Looking back at all three encounters, the shadow figure, the mysterious basement, and the cemetery children, what insights have you gained as a paranormal investigator?
I've learned that each location holds its own type of energy. Urban spaces tend to harbor more aggressive manifestations, perhaps reflecting the chaos of city life. Isolated places like the cabin reveal slower, more deliberate hauntings, and historical sites like the cemetery often contain echoes of the past rather than active entities.
That's a fascinating observation about how different locations seem to generate different types of paranormal activity. Has this changed how you approach your investigations?
Absolutely. I've learned to adjust my methods based on the location. Urban investigations require quick reflexes and constant awareness, while historical sites benefit more from patience and respectful observation.
For our listeners who might encounter something unusual, what advice would you give based on your experiences?
First, trust your instincts. That feeling of being watched in the alley was a warning signal I should have heeded sooner. Second, document everything. The cabin incident taught me that what seems impossible might have historical precedent. And finally, don't assume all supernatural encounters are malevolent.
Those cemetery children seemed almost welcoming.
Exactly. Sometimes these encounters might be attempts at connection rather than intimidation. The key is maintaining a balance between healthy skepticism and open-mindedness.
Do you think you'll ever fully understand what happened in these encounters?
Probably not, and I'm okay with that. Sometimes the mystery itself is valuable. It reminds us that there's still so much we don't understand about our world.
Sarah, thank you for sharing these incredible experiences with us. I have a feeling our listeners will be sleeping with their lights on tonight.
Thank you, Ryan. Just remember, if you ever feel something watching you from the shadows, or hear unexplained footsteps, or encounter something you can't explain, you're not alone. These experiences are more common than people think.
And on that beautifully cryptic note, we'll end tonight's episode. I'm Ryan, and you've been listening to Mysterious Encounters. Join us next week for another journey into the unexplained. Good night, and sleep well, if you can.